In this lesson, we'll take a look at three parts of the brain. We'll take a look at the diencephalon, the brainstem, and then we'll finish up with the cerebellum. So let's begin with the diencephalon. Anything that has the name thalamus is going to belong or be located in the diencephalon. For instance, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the epithalamus. Just to kind of give you an idea where it is, this is a sagittal section right through the middle of the brain from the first lesson on the cerebrum, right, just to kind of review, if you saw that lesson, all of this up here is the cerebrum, right? This kind of pinkish area here is the frontal lobe, parietal lobe all in here. This is the occipital lobe, just to kind of give you an idea. Down over here, this is the region we're going to be looking at now. This is going to be the diencephalon. Right? The first part we're going to look at is this kind of almond-shaped structure here. This is called the thalamus. All right, so think of the thalamus as a relay center. It's basically sending, let's just say, signals that are coming up your spinal cord from your body, right? They're kind of running up this way. Excuse me. They're going to go to the thalamus, and then the thalamus is going to relay it to the appropriate lobe for perception. So it sends the signals up to the different parts of the parietal lobe, let's say, to perceive precisely on your body what it is that you're feeling. Or this, even visual signals, right? But here's the eye would be down over here. Visual signals will come back from the optic nerve to the thalamus, and then the thalamus is going to send the signal back to the occipital lobe because the occipital lobe perceives vision. So the only sensation that isn't relayed through the thalamus is the sense of smell. All of our other sensations are relayed through the thalamus to the appropriate part of the cerebrum. Okay, so it's a relay station. It sends signals from the body, coming up from the body, to the appropriate parts of the cerebrum for interpretation. This little structure right here on the thalamus is known as the interthalamic adhesion. And we actually have two parts to the thalamus. There's a right thalamus and the left thalamus. And the two thalami are separated by the third ventricle. It's like a slit-like narrow ventricle that runs right here. So this little interthalamic adhesion connects the right thalamus with the left thalamus by going through the third ventricle. Okay, so again, the main thing I want you to walk away with right now is that the thalamus is a relay station. As sensory information comes up, it goes to the thalamus, and then the thalamus relays it to the appropriate lobes for interpretation. The next area we're going to do is the hypothalamus. So right here, this whole area, hypo means below, right? So below the thalamus is the hypothalamus. So the main thing here, this is the part of our brain that controls our body temperature, right? The fact that your body temperature stays at 98.6 has to do with the thalamus. If you have any sensations of hunger or thirst, it's the hypothalamus that sends out that sensations. It controls the autonomic nervous system. When we go into a state of fight or flight, that state of alarm, it's the hypothalamus that activates that fight or flight. And then it also controls the endocrine system. In AMP2, when you study the endocrine system, specifically the pituitary gland, you'll see how the hypothalamus has a major control over that pituitary. So just to kind of give you an idea, again, this is all going to be the hypothalamus. If we follow this down right here, this is a little stalk called the infundibulum, and from that hangs the pituitary. And this little bump over here is known as the mammillary body. And this is where some of our swallowing reflexes come from, controlling, swallowing. I have a blow up here. This is just to kind of give you some more detail, a little bit more detail than we need at this point. But this is all going to be the hypothalamus. So you can see there's a bunch of different nuclei, different regions in it that control different things. Here's that pituitary stalk known as the infundibulum. Here is the anterior and the posterior pituitary gland, right, the pituitary. And then here's that little bump that was hanging down. This is the mammillary body. The next region is the epithalamus. So epi means above. If this, again, the almond here is your starting point. This is the thalamus, right? Hypothalamus below, epithalamus above. So all in here, this is the epithalamus. Now, this contains blood vessels. If you saw the lesson on the cerebrospinal fluid, we talked about the choroid plexus. These are blood vessels that help to make the cerebrospinal fluid. So if you saw this on real dissection, you would see a bunch of blood vessels running right in here. This would be the choroid plexus, right? It's right by the third ventricle. And then if you followed that back this way, right about over here, there's a gland. It's not shown here, but it would be right about over here. There's a gland known as the pineal gland. The pineal gland produces a hormone. Again, we'll study this in A&P2, known as melatonin. And melatonin functions to suppress the nervous system, right? This is what makes you drowsy and allows you to fall asleep at night. Okay, so the epithalamus is above the thalamus. And again, the two structures I'd like you to know are the choroid plexus. Again, that's the capillaries. They help to make the cerebrospinal fluid. And then the pineal gland produces a hormone known as melatonin. Okay, so that's the diencephalon. Let's take it down now to the brainstem. So I'm just going to go back to this picture here for a moment. So the brainstem is going to be everything below the diencephalon. If this was the diencephalon here, all of this coming down right here is going to be the brainstem. Up here is the midbrain. Here is the pons. And then here's the medulla, right? Medulla oblongata. Those are the three parts of the brainstem. So my first dot there kind of summarizes what the brainstem does in general. It basically, I think of it as the primitive brain. This is what keeps us alive. It's responsible for breathing, right? The fact that you take a breath in and let the breath out, and that your breathing rate can change, has to do with the brainstem. It controls our heartbeat, right? Again, our heartbeat is constantly changing. It goes up, it goes down, depending on our activity. That has to do with the brainstem. It controls all the blood vessels as far as their diameter. Are the blood vessels constricting? Are they dilating? That type of thing. And then the last three are really important. There's reflex centers for coughing, sneezing, and vomiting. Right, if we weren't able to cough or sneeze, our respiratory system would eventually fill up with fluid and we would succumb, we would die, we wouldn't be able to live because we have fluid in our tubes. So that would be bad. If we ate something poisonous, right, there's a center in the medulla known as the vomiting center that would stimulate us to vomit. So again, these are all kind of life-saving or life-sustaining reflexes that keep us alive. And this is why when somebody does have brainstem damage, sometimes a brainstem stroke or trauma to the brainstem, it may be fatal, right? It could be definitely be fatal. So let's take a look at the parts of the brainstem. We'll start from the top and then work our way down to the bottom. So the first part is known as the midbrain. So let me show you what we have here. From right about here, all this green, this is going to be the midbrain. The bluish area here is the second part known as the pons. And then down over here, this is kind of orangey, reddish, is going to be the medulla. What they did was, going back to this picture, what we're looking at is a diagram from here straight down this way. That's what we're looking at. Okay, I'm going to show you a front view, a side view, and a back view. So let's take a look at some of these structures of the midbrain first. So there's four round bodies, four round circles known as the corpora quadrigemina. They're on the back part of the midbrain. If we were to look at the midbrain from the back here, this is a posterior view. So again, all of the green is the midbrain. 1, 2, 3, 4. These four round bodies collectively are known as the corpora quadrigemina. The top two are known as the superior colliculi, and the bottom two are known as the inferior colliculi, these two right over here. The superior colliculi, they help to control some visual reflexes, while the inferior colliculi control some auditory reflexes. That's so visual and auditory. On the front part, we can see a little bit of the colliculi here on the lateral side. On the front part, we have all these fibers that are running up and down. They're running vertical. These are known as the cerebral peduncles. These are anterior, and here you can actually see them cut. So these are bringing fibers, right, white fibers that connect the cerebral cortex, right, the cerebrum, with other parts of the brain. So these are basically the fibers that are running, say, from the spinal cord up to the up to the brain, or from the brain or the cerebrum down to the spinal cord, right? So you can see it's all kind of vertical fibers right here. This is known as the cerebral peduncles, right? So in the back we have the corpora quadrigemina, and that consists of the superior colliculus and the inferior colliculus, right? The two top ones are the superior, the two bottom ones are the inferior, and then here's a front view. From the front, we could see the cerebral peduncles, right? They're kind of running straight up and down. The last thing about the midbrain is that the midbrain gives rise to some cranial nerves. In another lesson, I'll do the 12 cranial nerves. This happens to give rise to cranial nerves number 3 and 4, right? The third and the fourth, oculomotor nerve and the trochlear nerve. The next region of the brainstem is the pons. Um, the Pons does a bunch of different things. Probably the most important is it's involved with respiration. Right? There's two centers. You'll talk about these in A and P2, known as the apneustic and the pneumotaxic centers. They help to control the control breathing for our purposes here. And the pons is in communication with the cerebellum, so it helps to process information that is sent to or from the cerebellum. So the pons kind of looks like a walnut. Every time I see it, it kind of just reminds me of a walnut. So this big thing right here would be the pons. And the pons also has some cranial nerves coming from it. It gives rise to the fifth through the eighth cranial nerves, right? See, the fifth would be the trigeminal nerve. The sixth is the abducens. The seventh is the facial nerve, and then the eighth we're going to see is the oculomotor. All right, so think of the pons as important for breathing and communicating with the cerebellum. There's actually, you can see here from the pons, there's different tracks. The cerebellum would be back over here, so you can see there's actually fibers going back and forth to the cerebellum. The last part of the brain, or brainstem, I should say, the lowest part of the brainstem is the medulla oblongata. This is the lowest part of the brainstem, and you can see here's a front view. So this would be the medulla here, and you can see the pons would be above it, and the spinal cord would be below it. All right, so all of this would be the medulla. So the medulla on the front has some motor tracks known as the pyramids. If I go back to this picture here, these two columns right here, this and this one here, these are known as the pyramids. But what's interesting is, let's just say this is coming down the left side of the medulla. So this motor signals coming from your left frontal lobe would be sent down this way. But right about here, these fibers cross to the other side and then descend the spinal cord on this side. And this is one of the reasons if somebody has a stroke on the left side of their brain, the right side of their brain, the right side of their body is going to be paralyzed. And that's because these pyramids here, these tracks actually cross. It's a crossing here, and then this one would cross over this way. Okay, those are the pyramids. Okay, let's make sure we got everything here. Midbrain we did, pons, and the medulla. Last thing, the medulla also gives rise to some cranial nerves, the ninth through the 12th. We'll see in, again, a subsequent lesson. The ninth cranial nerve is the glossopharyngeal nerve. The 10th is the vagus nerve. The 11th is the spinal accessory nerve. And then the 12th one is going to be called the hypoglossal nerve. The last part of the brain that we want to take a look at is the cerebellum. When the anatomists looked at this, they thought it was a separate brain, so they called it the little brain, right? The cerebellum actually means the little brain. This is primarily a motor area for us. This helps to control our skeletal muscle movements, right? The fact that you can, do things and move with a nice coordinated movement has to do with our cerebellum. It helps our muscle tone, again, coordination, our posture, and even our balance. Right. So those are the main functions that I'd like you to know. When you look at the cerebellum, you'll see that there's two hemispheres, just like the cerebrum, right? There's a right and a left hemisphere, and then in the middle we have these little worm-like connections here, or even this thing kind of looks worm-like. This is known as the vermis, right? Vermis kind of meaning worm-like. So those are the parts of the cerebellum from the outside. If you cut the cerebellum in half and you looked at it from the inside, you would see some white matter that has the shape or the branching of a tree. We call that the arbor vitae. And then the gray matter that would be on the arbor vitae, we call the cerebellar cortex. Right? That would be the more superficial part. And those are the parts of the brain, the diencephalon, the brainstem, and the cerebellum.